Hello and welcome to Sacred Mindshift Circle. I'm your host, Dahlia Deborah-Donald. Today, our guest is Makheni Zonneveld, known as the coolest granny in town. She is the author of the book Healthier and Slimmer. She has over 25 years experience as a leadership and personal development speaker. She is originally from South Africa and is rated one of the six. She is rated one of the top 6 speakers in the country. She currently lives in the Netherlands, where she has her company, Real Solutions Training, and continues to work as a wellness coach to aid women find their inner motivation to be healthy and at peace with their minds. Welcome. Hello, Makheni.
Hello, what a privilege being here.
So thank you so much for being on the show. I was very intrigued with your work. I know you also talk a lot about mental health besides actual physical health. And I invited you on today because I wanted to also give perspective to the audience about not only carrying physical weight, but what happens to us when we carry a lot of emotional weight, a lot of emotional baggage. So first, before I even dive into that, can you tell me first a little bit about yourself, how you began speaking, how you started, and what your life was like?
Okay, thank you very much. As you said, I'm from South Africa. I've only been in the Netherlands for 13 years. I followed my heart here. I grew up in South Africa because I'm this crazy person, had different careers. And I was a college lecturer. I was a mathematics lecturer at the teacher training college. And that very first year, in 1981, a colleague, Mrs. Rina Thorne, gave me a book that just turned my life around. I had studied behavioral sciences, all of them, majored in psychology, but it was before happiness psychology was invented. So psychology was something else. It was about clinical psychology, etc. And then I found this amazing message of you can change your life by changing your thinking. She continued giving me these books. They were Christian books, and because I'm a Christian. And later, I discovered even secular books like by Professor Schwartz and Napoleon Hill. And this became my passion, sharing the message of you can change your life by changing your thinking, because I didn't exactly have a happy childhood. And at age 28, when I read this book, I started having a happy childhood. I started realizing I could live above my circumstances. That became my passion. And I went on with different careers, got into the corporate sector, got into leadership. And then, 26 years ago, I started this. And exactly how I became a speaker agency actually contacted me after they had me calling morning, noon, and night, calling an English-speaking radio station in South Africa, talking about this, just inspiring people. And they said, we want to represent you. And that's it.
So that's wonderful. So over time, you really became passionate and wanted to reach out to more people to share this knowledge.
Yes.
Who normally are your biggest audience? Is it mostly women, men, younger, older people?
No, because I was operating in the corporate sector, so my audience wasn't just women, or it was just everybody. And my message actually is for everybody. So I was doing that only, personal development, leadership, etc., until I got ill in 2006. And in 2008, I got information that helped me. And that's how the physical health part came in. And because I was already a speaker and coach, I later, like 10 years ago, I started including the physical wellness part. But basically, I only started with the mental health.
So what were some of the features that you noticed that people tend to have a difficult time with, that they need help changing the way they think? What are some of the typical blockages that people have?
Realizing that your past should not continue defining you. And let's talk a bit about women. You said, who is my audience? Being a woman in South Africa, August is Women's Month. So the whole month, you have an opportunity to address women only. And most of the time, I spoke on this because I find it so important. One of the biggest limitations that women have is assertive communication. That holds them back. It affects them in the workplace. It affects them in their personal relationships and even in parenting. So I really emphasize that when I talk to women. Another one that I emphasize when I talk to everybody is forgiveness. I have a forgiveness story, and that's how I got this passion for forgiveness.
So can you share a little bit of this story of forgiveness? Because also, in the Bible, it teaches us that when you hold on to bitterness, when you hold on to anger and grudges, you basically are leaving open a door for the enemy to continue to attack you. And it's easier said than done, because I know many people go through many different things that are sometimes very difficult to forgive. But usually what the Bible teaches also is that you're forgiving for your peace, not for necessarily the other person. But tell us your forgiveness story, and tell us a little bit more about this concept of this weight of unforgiveness.
Okay. I'm glad you mentioning what the Bible says about forgiveness, because that is the foundation. The little trick is, when I do my work, like in the corporate space, when I'm a speaker, if I speak on forgiveness, then you can't exactly say, thus saith the Lord. And it frustrates me because we can't forgive in our own strength. So I normally speak only about what forgiveness is, that is for your own good, and how to forgive. But it's good that you mentioned that we can't do it in our own strength. My forgiveness story goes way back decades ago. I said I didn't have a happy childhood. And when people around me looked at me, they saw a happy childhood. Because when I grew up, I'm 71 years young. So when I grew up and I was like in primary school in the early 80s, we were the ones with money. We were the ones with the nice house, with the cars, with the nice clothes, with the nice food, and living in a poor community. And everybody thought I was happy, but I wasn't, because my father was abusive. And he had a friend who was a pedophile. I just say, somehow by God's grace, they didn't do to me what they did to other kids, but he touched me inappropriately, and his friend made me touch him inappropriately. That had such an impact on me. But because God is so merciful, it was repressed. It was at the back of my mind after that stopped. And it affected me for 25 years. And 25 years later, it just surfaced. Boom! I just cried and said I was abused as a child. And it was so difficult to forgive. I held on to the unforgiveness. I remember my mother telling me that you are a believer, you must forgive. I said, I know I'll forgive everybody except those two men. Because by then my father had left and married a younger woman. I said, I will forgive anybody, but God will forgive me. I will not. You see, I thought I would be doing God a favor by forgiving those two. And then a story for another day, how a sermon helped me to forgive. Actually, I had many sermons, but what helped me was one day at our church, they invited a woman called Joan. The sermon was her testimony. She talked about forgiving. I was angry. How could she forgive a rapist? How could she? And a week later, the penny dropped. This rapist doesn't deserve the forgiveness, but Joan deserves the healing. That is when I forgave. It was in 1999, and in 2003, I produced a CD to give to people for free on why we should forgive. Now, these are the reasons forgiveness is difficult. We think we are doing this person a favor. We think it is for this person. We think this person doesn't deserve my forgiveness. Oh, yes, they don't, but you deserve healing. And we don't realize what it does to us, what it does to the body. It kills us slowly. And another thing, if you're a Christian, God doesn't have suggestions. God has commandments. So we are commanded to forgive. God does not have, it's not a good idea or a suggestion. You see, when I stand in the corporate sector and talk about what a good idea it is to forgive for your own sake, I mean, that's in the secular world. But in God's economy, there are no good ideas. There are just commandments. We are commanded to forgive, and the measure by which you forgive will be used to forgive you. Oh, I didn't want God to use that measure to forgive me. So, and how do we forgive? By realizing we can't do it in our own strength, by realizing what it does to us, how it affects us physically, and just surrendering and choosing to obey and forgive.
So for someone who, for example, it could be something similar to your situation or something even worse, and people are contemplating trying to forgive someone who's done something so horrible to them, where do they begin? What are the first steps that you need to, because overall, you've explained overall the process and also the way that God commands us. So what are the first steps, like for someone to say, okay, I'm going to work at this little by little because I see that it is affecting me and I need to release this?
You know, I don't know if we should do this little by little. I'll tell you what, something very recent. On the 4th of May last year, 5,000 euro was stolen out of my account, just fished out. I got so angry, and after 2 days, I realized, hang on, I'm getting ill. I'm literally getting ill. And I said, Makheni, you are the one who preaches forgiveness. Forgive these people. And I could forgive there and then, because this happened when I already know what I know. I realized, hang on, forgiving is a commandment. Hang on, another thing I didn't mention, we wait until we feel like forgiving. What I say to people, if you want to forgive, don't wait until you feel to forgive. That feeling is not going to come. It will never come. So don't wait for the feeling, forgive, and in God's strength, it can be done right now.
Okay. And for you, how long did it take to forgive? Like, how long normally do you think it takes a person psychologically, after reflecting? How long does it take to forgive sometimes, or does it vary?
You know, let's look at this question. This is a very good question. How long? As I've said, when you forgive in God's strength, you surrender, you ask him for forgiveness, he grants you that, and you get his peace. But now I want to say something else about the how long. I said to myself 2 days after money was fished out of my account, hang on, Makheni, you've got to forgive. What if that had happened to you? You say to me, oh, money has disappeared out of my account. And I say to you, it happens. And that same minute, I'm your friend, you tell me. I'm your sister, you tell me. And I say to you, you know what, Dahlia, forgive these people. Wrong. You should tell yourself that I must forgive immediately. I must forgive. But when it comes to another person, if someone has just raped you, someone has just killed your child, that is not the time to say forgive. Support this person, be there, and after a while, maybe after 2 weeks or something, you can gently bring in the idea of forgiveness, because there's a difference between telling someone else that they should forgive and telling yourself. So if you're listening here right now you are the one who's going to tell yourself, I'm going to forgive right now. But let's refrain from doing that to other people, not the very next minute after someone's car is stolen.
Yes, I've heard stories of, for example, parents who, they've had children that they've lost to violence, and that years later they've gone to the jail and they've forgiven the person who took their child's life. And obviously, they themselves have expressed in the moment they were furious. They wanted revenge. They wanted everything, because that's when, of course, you're processing everything. But afterwards, after everything clears, you're a little bit more, I would say, I guess, calm in general, and you're able to start to consider this concept. So it's not something to rush into. Can you tell me a little bit about, for women, as you said, women tend to be more assertive. In society, we are normally the ones that are expected to tolerate everything, to endure, and to keep quiet about it. And, growing up, this can be very stressful. And how can a woman in this situation, especially as she gets older, because I don't know if maybe there's a difference as you get older and you've been carrying all of this unforgiveness. How does she process this?
Yeah, no, I think you made a mistake there. Women are not more assertive. This is a generalization, but assertiveness is behavior that doesn't come naturally to most people. So generally when men are not assertive, they tend to be aggressive. We know there are aggressive women also. But when women are not assertive, they tend to be non-assertive or passive. Now, I say assertive communication is important. There are workshops and books on assertive communication, but I always say, I don't teach people assertive communication. I talk about becoming assertive. Assertive communication is assertive behavior. So you are not going to behave assertively if you are not assertive. So assertive communication comes from assertive behavior. It is assertive behavior. You should become first assertive. And I don't know if we have time now to talk about how to become more assertive. It's one of my favorite topics, how to become more assertive for everybody. But this is how it applies for women. Society expects women to be non-assertive, actually. Society expects you not to assert yourself. So women fall into that. And then when it comes to work and personal relationships, we act in a non-assertive manner, and that works against us. And when it comes to assertiveness and forgiveness are two separate things, but assertiveness also affects everything. Also forgiving, because you feel you've got to remain a victim. As a non-assertive person, you feel you've got to remain a victim. And if you stand up for yourself, that is wrong. You've got to be this sweet little thing. And so that affects women. And women are not only oppressed by society. I don't talk much about women being oppressed, unless when it comes to abuse. But when it comes to assertiveness, I talk about how we oppress ourselves, how we put pressure on ourselves. Now, I'm 71. I don't know how old you are. You look very young. Then I put pressure on myself to look like you. I set goals. I always say when I talk about physical health gain should be the goal. Fat loss should be a side effect. And looking good should be a bonus. But now women have a goal at 71 of looking like you. And that is where you end up with Botox. That is where you end up with all these injections and operations and all, because you're trying to look younger. Women put themselves under pressure. You have to, at all costs, have a relationship. You have to, at all costs, be married. I told you about my forgiveness story, that it had to do with I didn't even want to be touched by a man. My mother had a problem with that. At age 27, she dragged me kicking and screaming into a marriage that should not have happened. And 10 years later, I divorced as a Christian, which was horrible for me. She had this thing in her head, being a woman, my daughter has to be married. My mother loves me. My mother wanted the best for me. But women think the best for my daughter is that she has to be married. When I say I did not want to get married, I mean, I did not want to be in a relationship. 20 years, for 20 years after the divorce, I never dated even once. That was my choice. Well, 20 years later, I met a stranger, married him, moved to the Netherlands. But for 20 years, you know that men were not trying to put me under pressure to get married. For the 20 years that I was divorced, from age 38 to age 58, it was women who were saying to me, "Oh, Makheni, oh, Makheni. At least date if you don't want to get married." It's not normal. Women think you are not complete when you're not in a relationship. We put pressure on ourselves. We put pressure on our daughters.
Yes, and sometimes I even speak about this. I'm actually 40, by the way, but thank you.
Oh, you're right.
Yes, but when I was around 27, 26, I started suffering from anxiety because I had this whole notion in my mind that I was going to finish school by 21, maybe by 23, you're working, you meet someone. By 25, I would have been married, having kids. And I was 26. I was already living in Barcelona and I did not have anyone. I wasn't married. And I started getting like my biological clock. And I could not even see a couple in the street with a child because I would feel like I couldn't breathe. Yeah. So it's very interesting that, yes, that women tend to hold on to these ideas and you know, I do, and it wasn't even really, I think, anyone pressuring me. It was all in my own mind.
Wrong. You were being pressured because those ideas come from society. Can I ask you for a favor, please?
Of course.
This biological clock thing one day, please. A lot of women are suffering because of that. A lot of women are suffering because of that. This is one sentence I always say about the biological clock. The biological clock does not exist. It's the social clock. You don't realize, you think it was a biological clock. You think it was physiologically in you. It was the social clock ticking. I hope we can talk about this one day. It's so important because women are suffering. And I'm glad you talk about it in the past tense. Because you are 40, I'm jealous, you look 25. You're 40, but you talk about it in the past tense. I'm a coach. I talk to women who are over 60. We are talking about it in the present tense. It's still a problem.
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, a lot of it came from, like I said, prayer and really finding my strength in God, because I was very, I think, weak at that point of my life because I was young also, and I feel like I had a lot of thoughts. Now, if you obviously were to ask me, and also afterwards I had children, you know, not in the perfect way of getting married and doing everything the right way, but I think also, you know, it calmed that sensation down. But I would never, like, for my own daughter, have her feel like she's inadequate or she's missing out on anything. And I always now believe afterwards that everything happens in God's divine time, you know?
Mm-hmm.
When you see women that are suffering now from emotional baggage, especially as they get older, what does that look like in their bodies and in their mental health? Like, do they suffer from anxiety? Do they suffer from depression?
Oh, yes. And earlier you asked, answer your question on, does it differ according to age? It doesn't differ. It differs according to individual. The only difference with age is that you've carried the baggage longer. And so it affects you more because you've carried it for longer. And yeah, it manifests in terrible ways in the body. And I had always believed this, that unforgiveness and emotional problems cause cancer in the body. And later, when I started studying nutrition, I found that it doesn't only cause cancer. It manifests in other physical diseases also. It's so terrible. Optimal living is a balance between the spiritual, the mental, and the emotional, the mental and the physical. And they all affect one another. They all affect one another. I always say the physical and mental is a two-way street. It's not one directional. So your emotional well-being causes illness in the body. Just like, a simple example that people can relate to is anger. Once you get angry, you see it manifesting. It's like when you talk about something you were treated unfairly. Have you ever seen someone looking pretty and smiling, talking about how she was passed up for a promotion at work? Your face gets twisted, you are angry, and then your heart races, clenched fists, clenched teeth, even your jaw becomes painful, and your body gets flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. And over a long period, like not forgiving, or not only not forgiving, staying in a relationship that causes that over a long period causes all sorts of terrible illnesses. So it's not a matter of age, it's a matter of how long. You may be 26, but having stayed in an abusive relationship for 5 years.
Yeah, I think, that's definitely a good point, because not only that, but do you think for them to rewire their mind and change their mind, the longer they stay in those relationships, it really deteriorates their sense of self, isn't it?
Yes, because this person makes you feel worthless, makes you feel you won't make it in life without him. They have a way, they are sadistic, they have a way of making you feel dependent and believing that you cannot make it in life. And some of them tell you that, some don't, just by their action. As a victim of pedophilia, I want to say this. A lot of people who've never been abused as kids believe that, or those who were told, believe that the reason kids don't tell is that they are threatened. I will kill your mother. I will do this. Not all kids get told. I wasn't told that. I was just scared of not being believed. I was scared that if I said, I'm touched inappropriately, or this one makes me touch him inappropriately, that my mother would not believe me and she would kill me. I literally believed my mother would kill me.
It's the irony. It wasn't even the threat from him. It was just the sensation that people would say, you're the one that is making it up, and you're the one that is a troublemaker.
Fear of it. And you know what? People do that as adults. In the workplace, people get sexually harassed by a boss, by a colleague, by whoever, adults. And this guy looks like a man of integrity. He is so respected, and he is a CEO. You are a secretary. Who's going to believe you? Who is good? And unless the man is known to be a jerk, by the way, we should not forget there are also men who get harassed. We are just saying women because they are the majority. But fear of not being believed doesn't only affect kids, it affects women. And then we say, why don't they report? It's such a big fear. I know, I lived with it.
And as far as also like forgiving someone who's done something like that to you, how do you know for yourself if you have truly forgiven them, or you're just kind of like saying I forgive? Like, how do you know the difference sometimes? Because There are people, imagine, there are people that can do me wrong, and I can maybe, if I don't have a lot of emotional connection with them, it's easier for me to be like, well, whatever, I forgive them. Then you have some people that have had more years, that I have built up more experiences of anger with, and I say, well, if I feel I cannot forgive them, I rather not see them and think of them at all, because I don't want to have negative thoughts. So sometimes that's my strategy. If I can't forgive someone, I try to eliminate them completely from every aspect of my life, so I don't have to remember them. But I don't know if this is healthy or not, but I feel after a while, at least, because you're not seeing them, it'll tone down those feelings of negativity. But what do you think about that?
I used to do exactly that. And I used to give it a very positive label. I used to say that's self-preservation. I used to call it self-preservation whenever I didn't want to forgive people and walk away from them. And they used this word again. If I don't feel like forgiving them, the feeling will never come. We never feel like forgiving. It doesn't come naturally. And if you say, if it's difficult to forgive, now, if you really believe in God, you say it's difficult to forgive. Do you actually mean it's difficult for God? You see, we should believe that in God's strength, forgiveness is nothing. I mean, God can forgive Hitler just like that. If Hitler were still alive and he said, Lord, forgive me, just like that. Forgiveness is what is in God's nature. So if God can forgive you and I for our sins, people, when people say to me, oh, Makheni, you're such a wonderful person, you're such a general person, you're such a kind person, you help me free of charge. And, people love you for that. And then after that person leaves, I think, God, thank you. You know my deepest being, and you love me. That's how big God's forgiveness is. So that very strength, sometimes you hear someone, the very power that rose Christ out of the dead is the power that's still available for you. If you really believe that, if God can forgive me, he can help me to forgive John, forgive Mary. We don't look at it that way, because we still remain in the mode of trying to do it in our own strength.
And also, I used to think that I could forgive if I felt that these individuals were repentant to God. But then I realized sometimes it's not our business, because that's between them and God, if they repent or not.
I'm glad you answered yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad you answered yourself. And another question that people ask me, if I forgive a person, do I have to tell this person, I have forgiven you? I say, I don't remember reading that verse. I don't remember reading that verse. If you think it will help your relationship, you can tell that person. And this is where it gets complicated. Most of the time, when people hurt us, they have not accepted it in themselves that they have hurt us. Like people say, they make racist jokes and say, I was just joking. Or a man says, oh, you're sexy. And you say, that's not a compliment, that's abuse. Makheni, I was just paying you a compliment. This person, so am I going to take the trouble to convince this person that he or she was wrong? Why? I forgive, it's between me and God. Finish.
So after spending so much time observing how unforgiveness and the weight of unforgiveness affects women and men and everyone who carries this in them, when you see people who are a bit older and they tell you, I don't know, it's too late for me because it's been so long, what do you say to them?
What a good question. I've never been asked that before. it's too late for me. That is what we believe. We don't only believe that about forgiveness, we believe that about physical health, we believe that about personal development. We believe that. So when it comes to forgiveness, and then I ask people, do you want to suffer for one more day? If you say it's too late, you've suffered so long, do you want to suffer for one more day? And do you want to suffer for the rest of your life? And when I talk to people about forgiveness, I start by acknowledging how difficult it is if those people don't believe. Because, I work in the secular world. And if that person is a believer, I start by saying how impossible it is to do it in our own strength. So this holds us back. The fact that forgiveness is difficult holds us back until you get to the realization that I don't have to do it in my own strength. Tra-la-la.
And after finally you reach that point of forgiveness, can you give a brief description of how we are changed? How does it change us? How is that burden when it lifts off of us? How does it reflect?
A load off your shoulders. Also, physically, after my abuse, even when it was repressed for 21 years, for 25 years, between the time the abuse happened and the time it surfaced and later when I actually forgave, that was decades. All that time, I used to have a recurring nightmare. In my whole life, I've never had a different nightmare. The same recurring nightmare. The day I forgave, I haven't had that nightmare. It was 1999. And it's just a weight off your shoulders. And your spirit breathes, your body breathes. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Now, if you were to explain how has all of the work that you've done helping people brought you closer to God, what would you say?
I thank God every day. And we're used to saying, why me, when things go wrong? I normally say, Lord, why me? Why am I so blessed that through you, I can be a blessing to others? Why me? What have I done to deserve this? And if it's paying clients, I say, I even get paid to do this. Why me? I feel so blessed. And I thank the Lord for that.
Well, thank you so much, Makheni, for joining me to discuss this topic. And for those who want to learn more about Makheni, you can find all of the links in the podcast to her website and for her book as well.
Part 1 of the book is on nutrition. Part 2 is on mental health, and forgiveness plays a big role. That I recorded in 2003 is now one of the free resources on freehealthclub.online.
Okay, we will link it in the podcast. So if anybody's interested, they can check it out. And be sure to subscribe to sacredmindshift.com so you never miss another event or another exciting discussion. And thank you so much. And God bless you, Makheni.
Thank you very much. God bless.